Welcome to Reality is Undefeated. I'm Ant Gatewood. Thank you for tuning in. For the proper context of my opinion, it's important for you to understand that I grew up without grandparents or any elder of that generation. I don't respect the elders simply because they're elders. I respect people based on how they approach me or what they mean to me, regardless of age. I respect the elder men and women of my community, not because they're my elders, but because I respect what they've done. They as a whole have put in work. It's easy to look back at those historical photos and recognize the faces up front and say that was this person's movement. But look at the men and women who showed up to support that person amid their movement. Not because it gave them something to do, not for a photo opportunity for social media, but because they believed in that person's leadership, understood what they were fighting for, were indeed up for the fight, but most importantly, would not let that person stand alone on that battlefield. Have you ever looked at one of those photos and thought, who was that person 7 rows back, 4th to the right of center? Or what about 10 rows back, dead center? We don't know them because they have never received the acknowledgement as the people on the front line. But what we do know is that they were ready to face the same consequences as the biggest name out there. The same dogs and fire hoses, the same rocks and bullets, the same sticks and batons. That, through my eyes, has earned them my respect forever. That's why they receive a yes sir, yes ma'am from me. That's why when asked to help out, and most times not even asked, I show up. That's why, as filthy as my mouth is, I would never curse around them. That's why I only speak when spoken to around a group of elders. But being an elder and having my respect doesn't mean you can say whatever you want to me without receiving a response. It doesn't mean the things you say are right or that I should hold you to less of a standard when it comes to the requirement of respecting me. It doesn't mean that it's disrespectful to challenge your position. Our grandparents and generations before them were not perfect men and women, and it's not disrespectful to speak on that. As many brave men as they had who walked the streets and put their lives on the line, there were still cowards amongst them, those who were afraid of confrontation, but will speak to a group of young people today as if they themselves were on the front lines, stolen valor, if you will. There were still those who prioritized their personal success over the success of the people as a whole. Those who had those good jobs, who weren't going to risk it by going out in the streets and upsetting them good white folks who hired them. A lot of our grandfathers spread themselves too thin, both in time and resources, created families here, there, and sometimes everywhere that they couldn't properly take care of. Some relied heavily on liquor to get their minds off the daily stresses. After all, when they left their homes, and sometimes at home itself, they were in a world that was literally trying to destroy them. Many of our grandmothers knew Papa had kids with that woman up the street when she met him. But she still encouraged him to stop by, grab a slice of pie, as she bathed, sprayed that perfume, and sat by that door nightly, waiting for him to knock. And in many instances, tried to convince him to leave that family. And when he left her with kids to bear and raise on her own, as he chased the next perfume-scented tail, she wasn't without fault in that ordeal. This is partly to blame for many of the broken homes that we have today. This is truth, not disrespect. I don't know who my grandfather is on my mother's side. I've never even heard a story of him. I don't know if my last name, Gatewood, which I get from my mother, comes from him or one of my grandmother's parents. I can't help but to think that this type of situation is the reason why, but I'll never know for sure. We have to look at things for what they are, not what we want them to be. Whatever the generations below us becomes, it will be because of what was or wasn't passed down from generations previous. If an older generation feels like someone who is 2, possibly 3 generations below them, isn't upholding certain traditions, values, and standards, there's no reason to scold that person. For the responsibility of those things being passed down to them was not their own. Is it my responsibility to reach out to my elders to seek the information on our traditions, values, or standards? Or is it their responsibility to make sure it's passed down by instilling these things firmly within their seeds? Key word being responsibility. The few instances that I can remember being told something by someone of that generation all came in a teaching manner, not a scolding one. I respected that approach, therefore I respected every word that came out of their mouths. Like when I walked into the grandmother's home with my friend Junior, and I stood at the door without speaking to anyone. His grandmother sat me down and taught me how to go about entering her home and anyone else's by properly greeting them. I use that same greeting when going on job interviews. And out of the 19 times that I've been interviewed for a position, I've been offered the position 18. See, when I look at my people, all I see is greatness. I see a people who had a police force backed by a mob greet them with all the aforementioned dogs, batons, etc. They still kept pushing. People who've watched all of their leaders be assassinated. They still kept pushing. People who were sent off to go fight a war they didn't belong in. Many of them came back stuck on that needle. They still kept pushing. People who influenced the youngsters below them to start their own movement, the Black Panther Party. People who could not be dealt with. So instead of going after them, the government went after their children, brought that crack rock in. And as someone with more knowledge of the situation commented, parked those rail cars with crates full of weapons in the hoods. Because the only way they were going to slow the movement of what that generation started was by convincing their young to destroy themselves. But our parents overcame that too. Recognize greatness when you see it. When I look at my elders, I recognize generations of people who went through those Jordan rules, went through that hack-a-shack, but still continue to attack that paint like Iverson, knowing they were going to get knocked down when they got there. It's only one way to describe a person carrying that type of resolve. Great. Flaws and all, my ancestors were great. Their greatness far outweighs their weakness, and I don't fail to recognize that. That's why I respect my elders, the men and women of my community. However, this is where I cut the deck. Because see, the elders of other communities get respect from me on a case-by-case basis. Because who was opposing my elders? That rock didn't throw itself. Oh no, those false accusations wasn't spoken by the wind. Someone was aiming that fire hose. Have you ever thought of the amount of people that you've blindly respected? I apologize, but these are the type of thoughts that my mind produces. Did Carolyn Bryant deserve to have doors open for her? Or to be shown respect by quieting down at her request by the young men of our community? Knowing that Emmett Till was pulled out of a house and brutalized to the fullest extent humanly possible because of a lie that was told out of pure hate for another race of people, I could never respect the person whose false claims set off that chain of events, no matter the time that passed. And knowing that he was just one of thousands makes my position on this square immovable at the current moment. As Kendrick said, I guess I have some healing to do. Let's play hypothetical. Y'all like hypotheticals. Let's say 10 years ago, she's at a grocery store in an aisle struggling to reach an item. And a young man of our community recognizes who she is and walks by her without helping. And let's say that caught the eye of an elder of our community, or any community for that matter, and they scolded him for that. Who's in the right? Who's in the wrong? Are they both right? Are they both wrong? Rather than the scolding, what if that elder approached that young man in a teaching manner and explained to him a few things about life, mistakes, regrets, a difference in time periods, and told him that no matter what, it's still important for us to help our elders because we would want someone there to help our mothers if our mother was in that situation. Does that make a difference? See, these are the little nuances that exist that make me take the position that I have, whereas I don't respect you for your age, but rather what you've done and how you approach me.